Hey everybody! So you just heard a part of Danny Elfman's theme for Spider-Man, uh, and the reason why is because for this video, um, I made a I guess to kind of give you a short summary and why I'm doing it. I made a pre-Amazing Spider-Man video before this one, which was kind of my thoughts about what would happen before or what going into Amazing Spider-Man, what I thought about it, and I also made an Amazing Spider-Man review after I saw that film, the one that came out on July 3rd. And so I guess I really wasn't given an opportunity in either film to really compare both Spider-Mans. So for this video, I really want to just talk about what's similar, what's different, and what's overall better and worse in both versions of the Spider-Man story on film. So that is what this video is all about today. So first off, guys, as far as similarities go, um, Peter Parker's spider bite origin plays out the same. He's at an organization somewhere, a science organization. Although both versions play out a little bit differently, it's not huge enough to say that they're different, I would say. So overall, the spider bite origin is similar in both movies. And when I say both movies, I mean the original Sam Raimi version and the new Amazing Spider-Man by Marc Webb. Um, the fact that Peter lives with his aunt and uncle again, which is something they kind of had to do because in the comics he's always lived with his aunt and uncle, Aunt May and Uncle Ben. So in a way they kind of had to do that because that's what happened in the comics. The fact that Uncle Ben dies in both films and by a killer, that's once again similar. And once again, they had to do that because that's how it played out in the comics. Um, Peter is a good photographer and he's good at science in both versions. Because once again, people are going to recognize him for those skills from the Daily Bugle, and he's just really good at science. The fact that Peter Parker earns a girl over time is very similar to. He doesn't have the girl right away in both versions of the film. And another thing to note is Peter actually dated Gwen Stacy before Mary Jane Watson. So even though the Sam Raimi version, he was immediately after Mary Jane Watson, the fact that he was after Gwen Stacy in the Marc Webb version that just came out is actually a little bit more accurate because he was in love with Gwen before he was with Mary Jane. Um, so I guess in some ways the new Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, is a little bit more accurate to the comics just simply because Peter loved Gwen before Mary Jane, and he didn't even know Mary Jane back when he met Gwen. Um, so I have to give a huge thumbs up to Marc Webb for actually following that in the comics. And Sam Raimi went a different route and said, let's just have Mary Jane overall. Um, but either way, Peter Parker has to earn the girl over time in both stories. The fact that the villains get their power from a green serum and they both work for Oscorp is similar too. Norman Osborn ran Oscorp, obviously, in both versions, but he had to use himself for the experiment since he couldn't get human trials going and he couldn't get any animal testing going. So he had to use himself in order to make the company survive. And it's somewhat similar with Kurt Connors, but if you have not seen Amazing Spider-Man, I wouldn't watch this video right now. But so make sure you see that before watching this video. But anyway. Kurt Connors doesn't have one arm if you've seen the new movie. So in a way, he kind of wanted to have this serum because he really wanted to have two arms back. So in a way, Norman Osborn had to do it because of keeping the company going. But Kurt Connors used the serum because he wanted to have his second arm back. So in a way, there's a want and there's a need in both reasonings behind the serum, but the fact that they both had to take a green serum and they both work for Oscorp is what's similar. The fact that Flash Thompson is a bully in both versions. Peter Parker's in high school for a part of the first Spider-Man film, the Sam Raimi version, and Flash Thompson's the bully once again in Amazing Spider-Man. And because Peter Parker's in high school for the entire film in Amazing Spider-Man, um, in some ways we get to see Flash Thompson more because he's in high school the whole movie. The fact that Oscorp plays an important role in both films is both similar. Oscorp is obviously there in the first film because Norman Osborn was the villain. He played Green Goblin. So it made sense why Oscorp is there. And this one, Kurt Connors works for Oscorp, and that's how they incorporated it. And I'm kind of surprised because Oscorp was big in the comics, but it's not as big as I think the films are trying to make it be. Because, like, for example, I thought Otto Octavius and Mysterio and a couple of those other villains, I think they worked for other science organizations. And even though there's a common theme of Spider Man villains being a part of science failures like experiments gone wrong, not all of them worked for Oscorp from what I remember. I think maybe Ultimate Spider-Man did that, maybe. But like as far as the original Amazing Spider-Man comics, I don't think all of them worked for Oscorp. But either way, both film versions of the Spider-Man story make Oscorp an important business within both worlds. Um, as far as differences go, you guys, Harry Osborn was actually not in the Marc Webb version at all, not mentioned, not talked about, not even in the movie. Norman Osborn was in the Marc Webb version, but they said that he was ill and was dying, and that was another reason why the Lizard, Kurt Connors, had to make sure the experiment went well with his green serum because, Norman Osborn was dying and he had to do it himself, kind of a thing. Um, Norman Osborn's real life downfall plays out differently in both versions. In the first film, he had to his company was failing, he was losing funding, and he couldn't get human trials going. So, like I said earlier, he had to make himself the experiment in order for the green serum to work, and also to make sure that Oscorp wouldn't fall. But in the Marc Webb version, he's very ill. We never really see him. I think there's an image shown of him when Peter walks into Oscorp in one scene. But other than that, Norman Osborn is a very small role in the Marc Webb version. And in the Sam Raimi version, he plays a huge role. He was the Green Goblin, he was the main villain, and everything. Peter's love interest is different in both films. In the first Spider-Man film, it's Mary Jane Watson, and in the Marc Webb version, it's Gwen Stacy. Once again, Gwen Stacy was the smarter choice simply because Peter was in love with Gwen Stacy before Mary Jane. But because more people are going to recognize Mary Jane Watson, I think that's why Sam Raimi ignored Gwen Stacy until Spider-Man 3 until he found a way to work her into the story. So the Peter's love interest deal is different in both Spider-Man versions. Peter does not work for the Daily Bugle in the Marc Webb version. I think Daily Bugle is referenced in one scene, like when he's looking at a newspaper. But Peter never walks in the Daily Bugle. He doesn't have a job there. We don't get to see J. Jonah Jameson yet. They might do that for a sequel or so. But I have a hard time seeing someone besides J.K. Simmons playing the role, so they might just get him back for this one. But either way, Peter does not work for the Daily Bugle in the Marc Webb version, and he does in the Sam Raimi one. Even though he's very skilled at photography, he doesn't have the Daily Bugle job yet in the Marc Webb version. Green Goblin is in the Sam Raimi version, but he's only hinted at in the Marc Webb version. The reason why I say that is, once again, if you haven't seen Amazing Spider-Man, stop now and go see the movie. But the guy that Kurt Connors is always talking to when it comes to the green serum, and he's looking for him on the bridge, the guy with the tanner skin, who's a big figure in Oscorp apparently. Many are hinting that he might be Green Goblin the Third from the comics. At least that's what they're hinting toward. And also just the fact that Norman Osborn has been talked about too, and he was obviously Green Goblin the First in the comics. So the fact that Green Goblin is overall just a part of the Spider-Man story is existing in both films, and the Sam Raimi one is obviously a lot bigger than it was in the Marc Webb version. How Spider-Man gets his webs and shoots his web is differently too. In the Sam Raimi version, it genetically came with the spider abilities after the spider bite. You see this little white dot on his wrist, and immediately it shoots the webs out when his mind wants him to in the Sam Raimi version. But in the Marc Webb version, Peter actually had to make the web blaster himself. If the web blaster broke, he had to go home and fix it in order to make himself web sling again. But he got all the other spider powers with the spider bite, but he had to make the webs on his own. And that's also the time when he figured that he wanted to be Spider-Man, thus making webs to make him more dominant of looking like a spider. The suits actually look very different in both versions. Here's a shot of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man suit, and if you can probably find this online somewhere. The suit in Amazing Spider-Man, it looks like a shiny basketball, and also Spider-Man's eyes are like black and look like a fly eye in a way in the Marc Webb version. So that's also very different. These ones appear more silver. So the overall Spider-Man suit looks different. I would also say Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man suit is more blue than red. So for those who are hoping for more red than blue, well, unfortunately, Andrew Garfield's has a little bit more blue than red. Peter is still in high school in the Marc Webb version. The whole movie, he's in high school. And in the Sam Raimi version, he's in high school the first half and is looking for a job and is about to start college in the second half of the first Spider-Man movie. Overall, guys, what's better? I thought Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was actually surprisingly better. I thought that, I liked his one-liners. I liked how he made smart alecky things around people. But I did think Tobey Maguire was a better Peter Parker. I thought Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker felt more nerd-like, felt more like the character. I thought Andrew Garfield's approach of having the lost child effect going for it didn't just appeal to me as much as the Tobey Maguire one did. Sam Raimi's vision of Spider-Man I thought was overall better. It just, to me, it followed the comics a little bit better. And even though the love interest thing with Mary Jane was inaccurate, just almost everything else seemed in line with the comics. However, I did like the first-person view shots in the Marc Webb version whenever Spider-Man was swinging around the city. And we get to see Spider-Man's vision in first person. I thought that was very clever in the Marc Webb version. The mystery of Peter's parents, I really liked in the Marc Webb version also. Even though that was a very minor thing in the comics, I'm glad that at least they're trying to do it in the movies. I thought that was very clever. What's worse, guys, is I thought Danny Elfman's score was a lot better than James Horner's score in the new version. James Horner's Amazing Spider-Man score just doesn't read as Spider-Man to me yet. Many complain that the emo side of Peter Parker from Tobey Maguire was a lot worse than Andrew Garfield's portrayal. Yes and no. I just put it there because I know it's a huge complaint about Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. Peter's discovery of his powers in the Marc Webb version I thought was very bad compared to the Sam Raimi version. Huge thumbs down on the Marc Webb portrayal of that. And I also didn't like that Peter was a skateboarder in the Marc Webb version. I thought that was very tacked on, and it just didn't read as Peter Parker to me. And a split decision, you guys, the villains. I'm not completely sold that the Lizard's the best villain yet out of all the Spider-Man films. I just loved Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and I loved Venom, and I loved, Dr. Octopus and all that. So, you know what? Split decision. I mean, it depends on which villain you're comparing. But overall, guys, I would say Sam Raimi's version is a tad bit better. Just my opinion, though. So I hope you enjoyed this comparison. I hope to see the rest of you back here for my future videos.